Kalon Hargrove was 43 years old, 6'2", broad-shouldered, and calm in a way that made people trust him before he ever opened his mouth. He had built a quiet, steady life in Atlanta, managing transportation construction projects by day, attending Redeemer Community Church on Sundays, and coming home every evening to the woman he had promised to love forever. From the outside, it looked like a good life. From the inside, it was held together by something far thinner than most people knew. And then one Tuesday morning, he placed a will on the kitchen table and waited to see what his wife would do. He left her nothing. $5.1 million in real estate, a beautiful house in Cascade Heights, and a community fund he had quietly built over 15 years, all of it signed over to another woman. His ex-girlfriend, a woman named Leora Vance. Now, before anyone makes up their mind about Kalon Hargrove, the whole story needs to be heard. Because what happened next is not what anyone expected. And what his wife did when she found that will is something that still brings grown people to tears. Before we get into the story, if you have ever loved someone who was too afraid to believe they deserved to be loved back, stay right here. This one is for you. Atlanta in late October carries its own particular quiet. The heat backs off just enough to let a person breathe. In the Cascade Heights neighborhood, old oak trees line the streets wide and patient, the kind that have watched whole families come and go without saying a word. Kalon woke that Tuesday at 5:15, the way he always did. Made a pot of dark roast coffee, stood at the kitchen window, and watched the first thin light come up slow over the neighbor's fence. There was a stillness to his mornings that people who knew him understood was not peace. Not exactly. It was discipline. The careful calm of a man who had decided long ago that falling apart was not something he could afford. He poured 2 mugs, set one on the counter for Zara. She would be up in 20 minutes. She always was. Zara Hargrove, née Bellamy, was 41 years old and the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday without writing it down. She was a high school counselor at Westlake, the kind students went to see voluntarily. Long glossy braids pinned up for work, let fall loose on weekends. And eyes that were always warm and watchful, like she was one step ahead of the conversation, but too gracious to say so. She had been holding her family together since she was barely out of her teens. She was, by every honest measure, a good woman. Which is exactly what made what Kay was about to do so much harder to watch. He set the folded will on the kitchen table. Then he sat down and waited. 3 weeks earlier, Kalon had walked into a private clinic in Midtown and received a terminal diagnosis. 10 weeks to live. The paperwork was real. The clinic was real. The doctor, Dr. Talia Moreau, an oncologist who had known Kay since Morehouse, was real too. What was not real was the diagnosis itself. Talia had arranged the documentation as a deeply uncomfortable favor, agreed to only after Kalon sat across from her desk for 2 hours and explained the fear that had lived inside him like a second heartbeat since he was 26. "I watched my brother lose everything," he told her. "His wife loved him fine when the money was coming in. The minute things got hard, she was gone. Papers filed before the moving boxes were even empty." Talia studied him. "Kay, are you sure about this?" "I need to know if she is staying for me," he said, "or for what I built." What he had built was considerable. Publicly, Kalon was a project manager with a decent salary and a nice house. Privately, he owned 14 real estate properties across Atlanta and the Redeemer Legacy Fund, structured quietly over 2 decades. Combined value, $5.1 million. None of it in Zara's name. None of it ever brought up over dinner. He had kept it separate not out of mistrust exactly, out of fear. The bone-deep fear of a man who had watched love become a transaction and could not risk it happening again. So he had designed a test, and now the will was on the table. Zara came downstairs at 5:38, still in her robe. She picked up her mug, took one sip, and noticed the papers. She set the mug down. She read the will once, then again. The house, the properties, the fund, every dollar. To Leora Vance. No screaming, no broken dishes. His wife simply sat down in the chair closest to the window, and one hand moved, almost without her noticing, to rest against the slight curve of her stomach, something Kalon still did not know about. "Lord," she whispered, "give me strength." She folded the will, slipped it into her purse, stood up, and walked to where Kalon sat frozen at the table. She wrapped both arms around him from behind and pressed her cheek against the back of his head. "We are going to fight this together, baby," she said quietly. "All the way to the end." Kalon sat very still, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his hands. She was not angry. She was not trembling. If anything, she held him tighter. From the outside, we can already see something Kalon cannot. This woman's love is not conditional. It never was. The question is whether he will understand that before it costs them everything. Stay with us, because what Zara does in the next 10 days will leave you absolutely speechless. 10 days after that Tuesday morning, Kalon Hargrove was checked into a private room on the 4th floor of Piedmont Hospital. The room had a window that looked out over a parking deck. Not a view worth writing home about. But there were flowers on the side table. Fresh ones, rotated every other day, brought in by Zara without ever being asked. He had not expected the flowers. Here is something worth pausing on, because from the outside, a quiet psychological pattern is already revealing itself. Psychologists call it attachment anxiety, the condition of people who learned at some critical point that love cannot simply be trusted. It must be proven, verified, tested under pressure. Kalon had absorbed that lesson at 26, watching his brother's marriage collapse the moment things got difficult. Once that kind of wound settles into the architecture of who a person is, it does not announce itself. It simply becomes the lens through which everything is seen. It becomes the reason a man goes to such extreme lengths to find out if his wife will stay. Not because he is cruel, because he is terrified. And fear, when it has nowhere honest to go, becomes a test. Within 48 hours of Kay's admission, Zara had filed for family medical leave from Westlake. She showed up every morning by 7, left each night around 9:30. In between, she read scripture from the worn Bible her grandmother had given her, sang hymns in a low, steady voice when she thought Kay was asleep, and handled every piece of hospital paperwork with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had been managing crises long before she was old enough to vote. She was not performing. That was the thing Kalon could not reconcile. She was genuinely, daily, choosing him. Without negotiation, without keeping score. Then his wife sold her SUV, a 3-year-old Chevrolet Traverse, champagne-colored, saved for on her own, gone in 4 days. She also picked up part-time hours at a nail salon on Cascade Road and began working double shifts at Target 3 days a week. Weight dropped from her face. The softness under her eyes deepened to shadow. But every time Kalon looked at her, she was smiling. Stepping back and observing from the outside, This is where a critical psychological pattern demands attention. Therapists call it compassionate overfunctioning, the pattern common in people raised in families where hardship was managed through sacrifice rather than honest communication. They respond to a partner's distress by pouring more of themselves into the relationship, even when that distress is being directed against them. Zara was not weak. She was not naive. She was a woman who had learned from a young age that love shows itself through action. From the time she practically raised her younger brother after their father passed. You stay. You carry. You hold things together, even when the cost is invisible to the person you are holding them together for. What no one was yet asking was a simple, important question. What does that kind of sustained pressure cost a body already carrying something it has not told anyone about? That answer was coming, and it would arrive harder than anyone was ready for. Rafe Bellamy found out about the second job on a Wednesday. Zara's younger brother was 40, ran an auto repair shop in College Park, and was built like a man who solved problems with his presence. He had a temper that arrived quickly, and a heart bigger than he wanted known. He pulled her into the hospital corridor one evening and looked at her until the silence became uncomfortable. "You out of your mind?" he said flatly. "3 jobs, Zara. You sold your car." "These might be his last days," she said calmly. "He deserves to have peace." Rafe turned to the window at the end of the hall, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. She watched him for a moment, then walked back to her husband's room. What no one anticipated was the phone call. 3 days later, Zara sat in the hospital parking garage, in a folding chair she had left there for conversations that needed privacy, and dialed a number from Kaylon's contacts. "Leo," she said when the woman answered. "This is Zara, Kay's wife. He needs a friendly face right now, and I believe that face should be yours." Silence. Then, "Zara, are you sure?" "I'm sure," she said. "Come when you can." She ended the call, pressed one hand flat against her stomach, breathed, then walked back inside. Leora arrived the next afternoon. Kaylon watched through the security camera feed as his wife met Leora at the elevator, said something that made Leora stop and look at her carefully, then stepped back to let her through. Something turned over slowly in his chest. Not guilt yet, but the dawning understanding that he had fundamentally misjudged the person he loved. Grandma Maeve came every Sunday with covered dishes, collard greens, baked mac, sweet potato pie, always a pot of chicken and dumplings that smelled like every good memory Zara had ever had. She led prayer over Kay's bed each week with a sincerity that made the weight of his situation press harder each time. Every night, after the corridor quieted to the hum of hospital equipment, Zara took his hands in both of hers and rubbed warmth into them slowly. "No matter where you go," she said softly, "I am still going to be here." He could not meet her eyes. From the outside, the deeper psychological truth is impossible to avoid. Cognitive dissonance was building inside Kaylon, whether he recognized it or not. His test was designed to expose selfishness. Every day, it was exposing the opposite. And the human mind, when its predictions fail this completely, pushes back. It searches for explanations. It tells itself, she must be performing. Nobody is this steady without an angle. That is the cruelty of attachment anxiety. It makes a person suspicious of love precisely when love is genuinely present. It trains the mind to read safety as a setup. So Kaylon watched, doubted what he saw, and watched more. What he did not know was that by week 3, Dr. Talia had let something slip, and his wife had pieced it all together. The documentation, the timing, the careful, evaluating way Kay had been watching her. She knew the diagnosis was not real, and she had asked Talia to say nothing. Because if her husband needed to test her, she was going to show him, without argument, exactly who she was. If your spouse secretly put you through something like this, would you stay or walk away? Stay or leave in the comments. Keep listening, because what happens next changes everything about this story. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks in. Kaylin was working through a cup of lime jello, which he disliked, but Zara had brought it, when his phone buzzed. Dr. Talia Moreau. Kay? Her voice carried the careful quality of a doctor who has decided to deliver difficult news directly. Zara collapsed during her target shift about 45 minutes ago. She is stable, but she is 4 months pregnant and her stress levels are critically high. The cup hit the floor. Kaylin sat completely still. The monitor beeped. The television down the hall murmured. The world continued moving while he sat inside something that had gone absolutely silent. 4 months pregnant. His wife had been carrying this. The hospital visits, the double shifts, the sold car, every night warming his hands in the dark and whispering she was not going anywhere. While 4 months pregnant. And she had not said a word. Talia, he said slowly, how long have you known? A pause. Then, she came to me in week 2. She had pieced it together, the documentation, the timing. She asked me to say nothing. Talia steadied herself. She said if you needed to test her, she was going to show you exactly who she was. His wife had known since week 2. Every morning at 7. The flowers, the hymns, the ring she sold to cover a bill for an illness that did not exist. All of it, with full knowledge of the truth. She had kept showing up anyway. Stepping outside the moment, what Zara did when she learned the truth carries psychological weight worth naming clearly. Researchers who study emotional regulation under relational stress describe a capacity found in genuinely secure individuals. The ability to hold 2 truths simultaneously. What is being done to me is wrong, and the person doing it is acting from fear, not from a lack of love. They can separate the wound from the intention. They respond to the fear underneath the behavior rather than to the behavior itself. Zara was not a pushover. She was not someone who accepted mistreatment from lack of courage. She had looked at Kaylin, understood the wound driving him, and made a deliberate choice to answer his fear with something larger than his fear. That is not weakness. That is one of the most sophisticated forms of love that exists. Leora came back on a Friday. This time, Zara had arranged things differently. Back on her feet and home, she prepared the guest room with fresh linens, cooked Kaylin's favorite meal, slow braised short rib, Grandma Maeve's cornbread, sweet tea so cold the glass sweated through a dish towel, and took a personal day so Kay and Leora could talk without interruption. She set the table, smoothed the quilt in the guest room one final time, stood in the doorway a moment. Kaylin had positioned himself down the hall, door barely open. He watched his wife stand alone in that guest room doorway, watched her wipe the corner of one eye with the back of her hand, quick and private, meant for no one. She straightened her blouse, walked back toward the kitchen. I just want him to be happy, she said softly. To herself, or to God, or simply to the empty hallway. Kaylin pressed his back against the wall, eyes closed, jaw locked against something that was trying to come apart. For the first time, admiration and guilt arrived at exactly the same moment and collided so completely He could not tell them apart. 20 years of building walls against exactly this, against being loved so entirely that the armor becomes the problem. And here it was, moving through his kitchen in worn house slippers, asking nothing. It was Rafe who finally said what needed to be said. He came into the hospital room 2 days later without knocking and without pleasantries, consistent with Rafe when he had decided something was overdue. He stood at the foot of the bed. "You think you were smart," he said, not a question. "Rafe," she knew. Flat, more serious than shouting. "Since week 3, the whole arrangement, the diagnosis, the will, all of it." The room went still. "She told me last night," Rafe continued, "because she needed one person to know. Because she is 4 months along, and even Zara Bellamy has a limit." He let that settle. "You know what she said?" Kaylin said nothing. "She said, if he needs to test me, then I am going to show him exactly who I am." His voice thinned slightly. "That is what she said. About the man who staged a fake terminal diagnosis while she was pregnant, while she was working 3 jobs, while she sold her wedding ring." The monitor beeped. "I know," Kaylin said. "Not yet you don't," Rafe said quietly. He walked out without another word. That evening, the members of Redeemer Community Church gathered in Kay's room. Grandma Maeve led the prayer. Church mothers sat in folding chairs, eyes closed, hands clasped. Young people from the youth ministry lined the back wall. The room held the quiet of people who had shown up, week after week, for a situation they had slowly come to understand was larger than one man's illness. Zara sat beside the bed, her hand in his, not looking at him, looking at her grandmother, expression steady, revealing nothing outward while holding everything inside. Kaylin looked at all of them, and the full weight of what he had set in motion settled over him completely. From the outside, the psychological damage of testing a partner becomes impossible to minimize. Every marriage counselor, every therapist who has sat with couples in genuine crisis will say the same thing. Tests erode the very thing they are designed to measure. They replace the possibility of honest trust with a performance neither person can sustain indefinitely. They communicate, beneath every layer of justification, the one message no partner should ever receive. I do not trust you enough to simply ask. Kaylin had been so consumed by fear that he had put Zara through something no pregnant woman, no faithful wife should ever have been put through. The damage was real. The love, it turned out, was more real. When the prayer ended, the room held its quiet. And then Kaylin Hargrove, who had not wept in front of another person since he was 11 years old, put his hand over his face. His shoulders moved. Zara felt it through their joined hands, turned and looked at him, and said nothing. She simply tightened her grip. 20 years of fear wearing the mask of control, finally beginning to come undone. Stay with us. Because what Zara does next, in front of the entire congregation, is something no one in that room will ever forget. Zara told no one what she was planning. She made a few quiet phone calls, spoke briefly with Grandma Maeve and Deacon Harris from the church council, and sent a single message to the congregation's group thread. Kaylin Hargrove needed his church family around him for a gathering that Sunday. She said it was important. She asked everyone to come. They came. By the time the morning service concluded, Redeemer Community Church was full, in the way it only gets for Easter and homegoing celebrations. Every pew occupied. Overflow chairs set up along both side aisles. Grandmothers fanning themselves with their programs. While children sat pressed between parents, the whole room quieted by the particular stillness that settles over people when they sense they are about to witness something that matters. Soft gospel music drifted from the organ. Warm light came through the high windows in long, steady columns. Two of the elder church mothers were already wiping their eyes with folded handkerchiefs. Not from anything heard yet, but from the weight they felt in the room itself. People who have lived long enough learn to feel truth before it is spoken. Kalon sat in a chair placed to the side of the pulpit, wearing his good suit as Zara had requested. He did not know what was coming. Zara walked to the front. She wore a deep plum dress, her braids pinned up with two of her grandmother's old hairpins. One hand rested briefly and instinctively against her midsection before she straightened, looked out at the congregation, and reached into her purse. She pulled out the will. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms do when something unexpected appears, and everyone simultaneously understands they do not yet know what they are looking at. She unfolded the papers carefully. Then she read every word aloud, clearly, steadily, without her voice wavering once. The Cascade Heights house. The 14 properties across Atlanta. The Redeemer Legacy Fund. The full $5.1 million. All of it, in her husband's handwriting, signed, witnessed, and dated. Left entirely to Leora Vance. Not a single dollar to his wife. The sanctuary held its breath. Several of the church mothers stopped mid-fan. Deacon Harris looked at the floor. Rafe sat in the third pew with his arms folded and his jaw locked, his gaze fixed on his sister with an expression that held fury and pride in a proportion only a brother could manage. Leora, seated near the back at Zara's personal invitation, went very still. And Kalon, who had come in his good suit thinking this was a prayer service, felt something drain from him slowly and completely. Then his wife lowered the papers, lifted her chin, and looked directly at her husband. "Kay," she said, gently, firmly, the voice she used with teenagers who needed truth delivered without cruelty. "I knew you were testing me." Gasps moved through the sanctuary, like a single breath shared by 100 people. "I knew from week 3, she continued. "Dr. Talia told me unintentionally, and I asked her to let me finish what I had started. Because you needed to know something I had never found the right words to say." She paused. "And I needed to show you instead of telling you." She held his gaze across the sanctuary. "I loved you from the day you climbed up onto Grandma Maeve's roof without being asked, fixed the leak that had been coming through her kitchen ceiling for 6 months, came down covered in shingle dust, turned down her sweet potato pie because you said you were in a hurry, and drove away in that old truck before she could even say thank you." A quiet smile crossed her face. "I was standing on the porch, and I thought, that is the man I want beside me for the rest of my life. No anger, no bitterness, no performance. Just truth, delivered gently enough to break a man open from the inside." Kalon could not raise his eyes. His hands were folded in his lap, and his jaw was working hard with the effort of holding himself together in public. The thing he had always been most committed to, and was now losing in front of everyone he respected. From where we are standing outside this moment, the psychology of what Zara just did deserves to be recognized clearly. Radical transparency. the act of naming a painful truth in a public setting, not to humiliate, but to bring something hidden into the light where it can finally be addressed, is among the most difficult and mature responses available to a person who has been genuinely wronged. Most people, understandably, would respond to what Kaylin did with either silence and withdrawal or direct confrontation. Zara chose a third path. She brought the entire community into the room as both witnesses and support, creating accountability without cruelty and truth without punishment. She was not exposing him, she was freeing him. That distinction matters enormously, and from the outside, it is exactly as rare as it sounds. Then his wife reached back into her purse. She produced a second envelope and held it up so Deacon Harris could receive and verify it. It was her own will, drawn up with her personal attorney 48 hours after she first found Kay's will on the kitchen table, before the hospital, before the jobs, before any of the sacrifice that followed. Every asset she owned, her savings account, her teacher's retirement contributions, her life insurance policy, and all future assets in her name, left entirely to Kaylin Hargrove and their unborn child. She had done it first, before she knew what any of this would cost her. "I do not need the money," she said clearly. "I need you." The room did not hold together after that. Two of the church mothers wept openly. Grandma Maeve pressed both hands over her heart and bowed her head. Rafe turned sharply toward the side window and stayed that way for a long moment. Children looked up at their parents' faces, trying to read in adult expressions what was happening in the room. And Leora, in the back pew, pressed one hand over her mouth and closed her eyes. The contrast from the outside is stark and clarifying. Kaylin had used wealth as a test. His wife had used love as a promise. He had arranged documents to determine what she would do when the security disappeared. She had arranged documents, before the test had even fully begun, to tell him, formally and permanently, that the security had never been the point. This is what genuine emotional maturity looks like in action. Not the absence of hurt, not the absence of anger, but the choice, deliberate, costly, repeated, to respond to fear with something larger than fear. To answer suspicion with a declaration so clear and unambiguous that suspicion has nowhere left to stand. Then Dr. Talia Moreau stood. She walked to the front of the sanctuary and faced the congregation with the bearing of someone who has carried a weight long enough and has decided this is where it is set down. "I want this room to understand something," she said. "The man sitting in that chair is not a villain. He is a man who was so afraid of being left behind that he could not find another way to ask whether he was truly loved." She looked at Kaylin directly. What he did was wrong. The harm was real, and he knows it. She sat back down. The room absorbed this, and then Zara, whose composure had held through everything, through weeks of sacrifice and silent knowledge and careful endurance, spoke again, quietly, almost to herself, except that the sanctuary was still enough for everyone to hear. "There is something else," she said. She looked at her grandmother first, then at Rafe, then at her husband. "Last year," she said, "I lost a pregnancy." The room did not make a sound. "I never told Kay." She steadied her breath. "Because I was afraid the grief would be more than he could carry on top of everything else he was already holding. I thought I could absorb it on my own." She paused. "I was wrong about that. That is something we still need to talk through, Kay. When you are ready." She looked at him across the room. "This baby feels like something given back to us," she said, her voice finally breaking. A single, clean fracture in weeks of held composure. "You tested me because you were afraid of losing me. I understand that now. But I never once thought about leaving you." That was the moment. Not the burned will, not the public revelation, not even the counter will with his name and his child's name written in careful, deliberate ink. This was the moment. Kalen Hargrove put his face in his hands. The entire family followed. Grandmother, brother, community. Leora stepped forward from the back of the sanctuary, wrapped her arms around Zara, and held her for a long, quiet moment. "You are the greatest woman he has ever had," she said near her ear. Zara nodded once and held her back. From the outside, looking at all of this clearly, the final lesson of this climax is impossible to miss. Forgiveness is not the absence of pain. It is the decision, made consciously, repeatedly, at real personal cost, to choose reconstruction over retaliation. Zara had been wronged, genuinely, significantly wronged, and she chose to respond not with punishment, but with truth, delivered in a room full of people who loved them both and could help carry what came next. That is not weakness. That is the most powerful thing one person can offer another. Stay with us, because what Kalon does next, that very night outside the church doors, is the moment everything finally, permanently, shifts. The night was warm for October. The church had emptied slowly, the way it does after something real has taken place inside it. People lingering in the parking lot in small clusters, voices low and careful. The kind of conversations reserved for moments too significant for ordinary words. Grandma Maeve stood near the side door, accepting embraces with her usual steady grace, offering quiet reassurance to people who needed it. The deacons folded away the overflow chairs. Someone's grandchildren chased each other between parked cars until a word from their grandmother brought them back to heel. Kalen walked outside just as the last of the congregation was making its way toward the lot. He stood on the front steps beneath the old oak that had grown at the corner of that building since before most of these people were born. The night air settled around him. Insects sang along the foundation. Somewhere down the block a porch light was on, and a dog was barking at something it could not reach. He stood there for a moment. Then he stepped back inside and asked Deacon Harris, quietly, if he could borrow a lighter and a metal waste bin. Deacon Harris looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then he went and got both without another word. The congregation gathered without being asked. Word moved through the parking lot in the quiet, organic way news travels in a community that has been together long enough. "Kay's doing something. Come back. Come see." And within minutes, most of them were standing in a loose half-circle on the church lawn in the October dark, still warm in their Sunday clothes, watching. Kalen held the old will above the open mouth of the metal bin. He did not make a speech about it. He simply let it go. The paper caught fast and burned quick. All that formal language reducing itself to ash, and a brief, bright column of light that lit his face for a moment, before it was gone completely. He set the bin down, reached into his jacket pocket, produced a second document, already drawn, already signed, already witnessed, that his attorney had prepared at his request 2 days prior. Because, whatever else Kalen Hargrove was, he was a man who prepared for things, even when those things were his own reckoning. He passed it to Deacon Harris to hold. It left everything: the house, the 14 properties, the Redeemer Legacy Fund, every dollar of the $5.1 million, jointly to his wife and their unborn child. Deacon Harris received it with both hands. Then, for the first time in front of another human being, Kalen spoke the whole truth. Not in the controlled, measured voice he used for construction meetings or church council discussions. In the other one. The one with edges that shook slightly because it had not been released in a very long time. He told them about his brother. About watching a man he loved and admired lose everything he had built because he had trusted too completely and too soon, and the papers had been filed before the moving boxes were empty. He told them what that had done to him. Not all at once, but over time, the way damage usually spreads, filling the spaces where trust should have lived with contingency plans and distance, and what he had long convinced himself was wisdom. "I turned love into something to be proven," he said, his voice rough and unguarded in the night air. "Because that was the only way I knew how to feel safe. And I put his wife, who has never once given me a reason not to trust her, through something I cannot take back." He stopped, drew a breath. "I am ashamed of what I did, and I will spend a long time making it right." Then he turned to Zara, and he went down on one knee. Not for the room, not for any performance, simply because his body moved there before his mind had fully caught up. "I am sorry," he said. Zara looked at him for a moment, long enough for the night to feel very quiet around both of them. Then she reached down, took his arm in both of her hands, and lifted him gently back to standing. "We do not need tests anymore," she said softly. "We need trust." He pulled her in close, and the congregation, grandmothers and deacons and young people, and one tall woman from a nonprofit who had driven across Atlanta to be here, responded with something that was part applause and part something older and deeper. The sound a community makes when it has witnessed something that needed to happen and has finally seen it happen. From a psychological standpoint, stepping outside the moment to observe it clearly, what Kalen did in front of that congregation represents something clinically significant. Public accountability is one of the most effective catalysts for lasting behavioral change. It is not enough to recognize a harmful pattern privately. Real transformation requires acknowledgement in the presence of the community whose trust has been affected. Kalen did not make excuses. He did not minimize. He named what he had done, named where it came from, and asked for nothing in return except the chance to do better. That is the beginning, not the completion, of repair. And in the weeks that followed, the Hargrove family moved forward the way recovery actually moves. Not in a straight line, not all at once, but with daily intention and the occasional honest conversation that replaced what used to be silence. Kalen began seeing a therapist for the first time in his adult life. A man in his 50s who practiced out of an office in Vine City, unfazed by the weight of what Kay brought in and steady enough to help him carry it differently. His wife reduced her hours at Westlake and began preparing for motherhood with the same organized, purposeful calm she brought to everything. Together, they established the Hargrove Bellamy Legacy Foundation, a community initiative supporting Black youth and working families across Atlanta. Rafe ran an auto shop mentorship arm through it, bringing in young men from the neighborhood who needed direction and something constructive to do with their hands. Grandma Maeve led Sunday prayer circles that eventually drew enough attendees that the church had to open the overflow room. Leora partnered her nonprofit with the foundation, multiplying what either organization could have accomplished alone. Kalon transferred his properties into shared ownership with Zara. Quietly, without announcement, with the particular relief of a man who has finally set down something he was never meant to carry by himself. And slowly, without anyone declaring it officially, the Hargrove house became full again. Soul food on the kitchen counters every weekend. Gospel music through the rooms. Children from the neighborhood running through the backyard, while Grandma Maeve and Deacon Harris argued cheerfully over dominoes on the back porch. A ritual that had apparently been ongoing since the Johnson administration and showed no signs of stopping. From where we are standing, watching this family stitch itself back together in the ordinary, daily, unheroic way that genuine healing works, the deepest lesson settles in clear and quiet. Trauma does not stay contained. Left unaddressed, it spills into the relationships of the people we love most, disguising itself as caution, as control, as wisdom. Kalen's fear of abandonment had not protected him. It had nearly destroyed the very thing worth protecting. But family, faith, honest community, and the willingness to be seen, fully and without armor, are the conditions that make genuine healing possible. The walls, dismantled piece by piece, were replaced with something that had no single name, but felt, every morning, like honesty. Stay with us, because 3 months later, on the front porch of the Cascade Heights house, one final door opens that neither of them was expecting. 3 months later, it was the kind of summer evening that makes Atlanta feel like something worth staying for. The heat had backed off by 7 o'clock, and the old swing on the front porch of the Cascade Heights house was doing what it had always done, creaking its slow, uneven creak that Kalen had been meaning to fix for 2 years. He had now officially decided it was part of the house's personality and would stay exactly where it was. Zara had told him she would be sad if he silenced it. That had settled the matter. She sat with one hand resting over her belly, house slippers on, a glass of sweet tea condensing on the porch rail. The oak tree in the yard, planted by Kay's father 30 years ago, back when it was thin and uncertain, stood wide and tall in the last of the evening light, branches reaching over the sidewalk with the ease of something that knows exactly where it belongs. Kaylon came through the screen door and settled into the swing beside her. The creak deepened. Down the block, Miss Cora was watering her petunias in her housecoat, a nightly ritual the neighborhood had long since absorbed without comment. "You made me cry from happiness," Kay said quietly, close to her shoulder. Zara laughed, soft and real, the kind that settles into an evening. "That is why God gives people second chances," she said. He wrapped his arm around her from behind. She leaned back against him. From the outside, watching these two people in the ordinary peace of a summer evening, the truth this whole story has been moving toward is finally clear. The oak tree is standing, not because the drought years did not come, not because the storms did not hit when it was young and uncertain and nobody on the block was confident it would take. It is standing because it was rooted in something real, and it kept growing anyway. That is his wife. That is Zara Hargrove. She did not survive this season because it was easy. She survived because she was grounded in something Kaylon's fear could not uproot. Faith. Self-knowledge. A love that was never contingent on conditions being fair. 3 months earlier, Kaylon had come home from his first therapy session and sat at the kitchen table. "I have been afraid my entire adult life," he said, "and I did not know that fear had a name." Zara set her coffee down and looked at him. "It has several names," she said. "Fear, trauma, armor." A pause. "Also stubbornness. But we do not have to address that one today." He laughed for the first time in months. A real one, all the way through. That was the evening things began to feel like home again. The Hargrove Bellamy Legacy Foundation held its first community event in August, billed as a back-to-school resource fair, but in practice, also a block party. Grandma Maeve's food spread across 3 folding tables. A gospel quartet performed under a canopy. Around 40 children ran through a sprinkler along the curb, while the adults pretended not to notice. Kaylin stood at the registration table and watched it all with the expression of a man finally beginning to understand the full size of what he had been given. His wife sat with Grandma Maeve in the shade, the two of them leaning close in quiet conversation, while Grandma Maeve worked through her third piece of pound cake and told Zara about the prayer she had been bringing to God for 18 months. That whatever was sealed up inside Kaylin Hargrove would crack open before it cost them what they could not get back. "He works in mysterious ways," Grandma Maeve said, patting Zara's hand. "But he always works." Leora stayed 2 hours, helping Rafe organize donated school supplies with quiet efficiency. Before she left, she hugged Zara the way she had at the church, holding a beat longer than a casual parting requires. "You gave him something no test could manufacture," Leora said. "What is that?" Zara asked. "Proof," Leora said simply, "that he was worth choosing." That evening, as the last light dropped behind the fence and the fireflies rose slow along the sidewalk, Kay's phone rang. Unknown number. He glanced at Zara, eyes closed, face tipped toward what remained of the light, one hand resting over the child they were 3 months from meeting. He answered quietly. "Kay?" Leora's voice, measured, careful. "There is something important about the old will, something I should have told you before now. We need to talk." Kaylin looked at the oak tree, standing wide and patient in the dusk. The same tree his father had planted before either of them was old enough to understand what it means to build something intended to outlast you. His heartbeat shifted. Maybe their story was not entirely finished after all. Maybe the past still had one final door it needed to open. This story teaches us that true love is not found in wills or wealth, but in the person who stays when staying costs them something real. Zara did not remain through that season for the house, or the properties, or the fund. She stayed for the man. She stayed for the marriage. She stayed because love, when it is the genuine kind, rooted in faith and shaped by sacrifice, does not require a test to establish itself. It simply keeps showing up, day after day, in the hospital parking garage, at the side of a bed, in a worn Bible read aloud in a low voice in the dark. For those of us who have been in long marriages, who have watched people we love give their loyalty to partners who did not fully understand what they were holding, this story is a quiet reminder. Quiet strength is real. Dignity endures. And a person who chooses you again and again through your worst and most frightened behavior is the rarest thing this life has to offer. Do not let fear convince you that you do not deserve it. Written by a human, with AI as companion. It hopes to leave you with a warm feeling that even when wrongly treated or looked down upon, there are still people and good things quietly standing on your side. Production team. Story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.